And we're all taught that you got to stay in touch with the client. You need to communicate with the client. You need to tell them every step you're taking on their behalf so that they know that first of all, you're on top of it. Second of all, that they're being adequately represented.
Welcome to Deals and Developments, a real estate podcast from the Dykema law firm. I'm your host, Dan Schairbaum. For more episodes, you can find us at dykemapodcast.com, youtube.com/Dykema Law, or by searching Deals and Developments wherever you get your podcasts. On today's episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by my former partner, Carl Rashid, who I've known for the past 14 plus years as a lawyer here at Dykema. Carl's career extended well before Dykema, dating back 50 plus years as of June of 2024. So as of the recording here, will be nearly 51 years of practice. And Carl and I thought it would be a nice exercise and useful for younger attorneys, whether at Dykema or elsewhere, to hear some pearls of wisdom that Carl has learned over his 50 plus years of practice. And so I'm happy to introduce Carl Rashid, and Carl, turn it over to you for maybe your first pearl of wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here making this recording with you, this podcast, I should say. And yeah, it's been a great 50-year run. I've enjoyed every moment of it. I love the profession. I loved what I did. And it started out in law school in 1971. And what I did, and my pearls of wisdom, if you will, were get as much experience as possible. Okay. Do everything you can to learn more about the law and the practice of law. Because while going through law school, we certainly learn the basics, whether it's criminal law, constitutional law, take your pick, uniform commercial code. But you got to get experience to really get out there and practice. So what I did in law school, I had the good fortune to be able to sign up my second year as a student assistant prosecutor with the city of Detroit. And it gave me the opportunity to go in court and to act as a student, a law student, if you will, under the court rule, to practice before the court in misdemeanor cases. And I did that for the whole summer, enjoyed every minute of it. And I was looked upon with some favor by a couple of the judges, one of whom allowed me to actually conduct a jury trial.
Incredible.
It was a misdemeanor for accosting and soliciting. And the other side, the defendant did have an attorney, and I was the student prosecutor who brought the case before the jury, and we convicted the individual. But anyway, it was a tremendous experience, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And when I went back to school that fall to share with my colleagues and the school, I convinced the school to start a student prosecutor program that would allow for credits for participating in such a program to give students, the benefit of getting that experience.
Carl, what year was that? You're between your second and third year?
It was between it was between my second and third.
Okay.
That's correct. Well, yes, that was that summer. And then that fall, I went to work for, and again, I wasn't being paid. I was paid, by the way, by the city of Detroit for the student prosecutor intern program. And then that fall, I went to work for Neighborhood Legal Services. So I learned the basics of criminal law from that program with the city. And then I went to Neighborhood Legal Services. And what they did is primarily divorces for indigent people. Mm-hmm. People who just couldn't afford to go out and hire an attorney. Neighborhood Legal Services would assist them, and they would hire students such as myself to come in and represent them in civil court. So I wanted to get the civil side of the law as well. So I did that for about 6 months. And then I also clerked for a law firm. So the whole thing being to get as much experience, as much exposure as I could to learn the practice of law.
Yeah. Do they still allow student prosecutors? I hadn't heard of that until
there was a court rule, and I think the court rule still exists, and I should have looked it up before we got on this, but I want to say it was in Chapter 9 of the MCR, or possibly Chapter 8, but I believe it still does exist. Yeah.
And then, so following graduation, did you move right to the city of Detroit?
I did. I did because I
Okay.
enjoyed what I had done with them. And right after law school, I interviewed with a couple of firms, and there were a couple of them downtown that had offered me positions, but I decided to go with the city of Detroit to get the experience again.
Yeah. And does that same theme then follow you into the city of Detroit, where you try to get your hands on whatever you can within the law department?
Exactly. Yes. I was very fortunate, Dan, when I joined the law department. It was the June of 1974. I actually joined in February, okay, as a clerk, and then I was hired in June when I passed the bar. And the case I was assigned to as a very fresh attorney was phenomenal.
Hmm.
On the other side was the law firm of Dykema, Spencer, Goodnow, and Trigg.
How about it?
Yeah, how about it is right. I was the liaison from the City of Detroit Law Department. I was the young associate working with outside counsel who happened to be Anna Diggs Taylor,
Hmm.
who later became a federal judge.
Wow.
And the case involved discrimination by two private clubs located on Belle Isle against city residents. And it was a case that had been pending for a number of years and finally was going to trial. And I was the attorney, the young associate, along with Anna, to represent the city of Detroit. And it was just tremendous. It was Nathan Goodnow, and Mark Sutton from Dykema representing the defendants, and Anna Dix Taylor and myself and her firm, Paps, Maurer, and Digg, representing the city of Detroit.
And I guess during your time at the city, did you touch a lot of different areas? I want to kind of transition to how did you find yourself eventually leaving the city and into private practice? And in what area did you end up kind of focusing your time?
So while I was at the city, again, and after this case was settled, it was concluded, there was a need to represent the City of Detroit Board of Assessors, the Treasurer, and the Finance Department. And I happen to have an accounting degree, a Bachelor of Science in accounting degree, always had an interest in tax, and I was, assigned to represent those three departments, which I did for the next 6 years.
Okay.
So I was part of the original Michigan Tax Tribunal, which had just been newly formed in 1974. And I was part of an ad hoc group that came up with the rules for practice and procedure at the Michigan Tax Tribunal. But for those 6 years at the city, I represented those three departments, the assessors, the treasurer, and the finance department.
And then you moved to Butzel.
And then I moved to Butzel in September of 1980. Yes.
Okay.
And I came over to Butzel. I had cases against Butzel. They had a group of attorneys that did a lot of property tax appeals, and as did Miller Canfield, Dickinson Wright. All the large firms had property tax appeals. Honigman was real big in the area. And so I went over to Butzel. They recruited me, if you will, and I practiced property tax appeals and general civil litigation along with that at Butzel. And I want to just back up about during law school. I want to mention something. In addition to the experience I received as a student prosecutor, student defense attorney doing not criminal, but civil law, primarily divorce, okay, family law, I would go to trials in federal court or circuit court if there was something of great interest. And at the time, there was a couple of big cases pending in federal court. F. Lee Bailey, who was an attorney back then, pretty well-known attorney, very prominent, if you will, had a case in federal court, U.S. District Court, and I went and sat in and watched him. And I did that the same thing, whether it was at a recorder's court or Wayne County Circuit Court. If I knew of a good trial going on with some good lawyers, I would go watch it.
What great advice. I mean, what better way to
Really?
learn
Yeah.
than to watch the best practicing, in the profession. And
Exactly.
that's
And
true.
the judges were always so welcoming. Okay. They'd see me sitting in the back of the courtroom and they would ask who I was, am I a witness and I would indicate, no, Your Honor, I'm here as a law student, just observing this trial.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether you want to be a professional athlete or a great lawyer, watching people who have really refined the skills that it takes that's great advice.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, still on this topic, for young lawyers that enter a large law firm. I think that your advice holds true there too, because it can be political at times as to where your work comes from, and
Right.
getting out even inside your own firm and visiting different offices, getting to know as many people as you can
Yes.
within the law firm, I
Yes.
think is a good strategy for a young lawyer also. I don't know
It's-
if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's a great strategy, Dan. And you got to get out. What I found when we were interviewing various summer associates or regular associates that coming to the firm, whether it was at Dykema or Butzel, uh, people would come out of law school with an idea in their head that they're going to practice in this area. And I would always tell them when I was interviewing them, don't limit yourself. I mean, try everything. See what you really like. You might think you're going to be a great uh, real estate attorney or tax attorney, but try litigation, try everything.
Yeah.
And people need to do that. They need to keep an open mind and they need to knock on doors. You're absolutely correct. Knock on doors, volunteer to assist attorneys, no matter what area they're in.
True enough. Even the pro bono opportunities
Yes.
that are available, even if you're in a practice group, you can get a little variety
Exactly.
and exposure to other parts of the law in that way. So
Exactly. And the neighborhood legal services work that I did was all pro bono. And it was to help, again, indigents with family law matters. But it was a tremendous experience for me to be able to go in there and, circuit court, represent this individual requesting a divorce or whatever was involved, maybe child custody.
Carl, that's maybe a good transition, talking about getting out there. I know your second pearl of wisdom is, you're active in your practice, but also being active in your community. So
Yeah.
wanted to
Absolutely.
kick it over to you, to talk a little bit about that part of the practice too.
Yes. Yes. You've got to get out and do volunteer work or whatever is involved, but let people know who you are, what you do. So you got to get active in various community activities, whether it's a sport, for example. Like my two sons were hockey players. So I got involved with the Grosse Pointe Hockey Association. I became the president of the association. I was on the city council for the city of Grosse Pointe where I lived at the time. I was on the church parish council to get to know the church. I did a number of things for various hospitals or other organizations pro bono, just so people know who I am. And in addition to knowing who I am, they would know the firm that I worked for.
That's a great point. And we talk a lot about cross-selling and
Yes.
cross-serving.
Yeah.
And if you're out in the community, it may not be a tax appeal issue or a real estate issue that
Right.
comes up, but you're known to be a problem solver. And with a firm like Butzel or Dykema in the current case, yes, it makes you a go-to person for people who need assistance.
And the other thing, Dan, is, getting involved with the bar association, whether it's the state bar, Detroit bar, or any other local bar. And I was very active in a number of those bar associations. And there's the other thing about giving seminars, but of course they're looking for people with experience. So after a couple of years of practice, it's a great idea for an attorney to get out there and volunteer to provide seminars to the various state bar sections that you're involved in.
And really identify yourself as an expert. I had a boss in Chicago years ago that was supportive of, the lawyers in the firm joining organizations, but he always said, if you're going to join an organization, your objective should be to ultimately become the president of that organization. And it sounds like that's what you did in a lot of instances, maybe not by design every time, but eventually it sounds like you became a leader in those groups too.
I was very fortunate. You're absolutely right. And it did work out that way. And it's, I think it's the nature of our profession. We join an organization, we volunteer our time, our knowledge, and people look upon you. And if you're doing a great job, well, they view you as a leader, and they ask you to take that leadership position. And that did happen on a number of instances. And I was very happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked a little bit about seminars and getting yourself out there. Marketing yourself is another, I know, key item.
Yeah. So important. So important. You could be the best lawyer in your designated area of practice. And if nobody knows about it, it doesn't do any good.
Yeah.
So you've got to get the word out. You got to let people know who you are, what it is that you can do. And the way to do it, especially to a large crowd, is to do it by virtue of a seminar. Now, a lot of the state bar seminars, as you know, is to other attorneys, and that works out great. For a number of years, what we did at Dykema is we had attorneys that would be part of the Michigan CPA annual meeting, and we would put on presentations. And now you're opening up yourself and the firm to a large group of professionals, CPAs, practicing accountants, who go back and say, geez, we just went to the seminar and there was an attorney from Dykema and he or she had the issue that we're talking about.
Yeah.
We should call them.
Knows their stuff. So yeah, let's
Yes.
call Carl or whoever
Yes.
was a
Or
presenter.
whoever.
Yeah.
Exactly. It works out very well,
Yeah.
extremely well. So we did that for a number of years at Dykema. And Dykema is still a big sponsor of the MICPA annual meeting. And I'm pretty sure some of our guys, some of the people in the tax department are still participating in that.
Very good.
Yeah. So yes, marketing is very important. And of course, at Dykema, we're very fortunate with the large marketing department that we have, with the extremely capable people in the marketing who can get the word out for you and let people know who you are and what you do.
And help us with things like LinkedIn and all the other options that maybe certainly weren't available when I started, certainly weren't available when you started.
No.
You've seen a lot of changes in technology over your 50 years. I don't know do you want to talk about a couple?
Dan, I'd be glad to. I mean, today's world versus when I started in 74 is just, it's unbelievable how it's changed. We went from typewriters and carbon paper to make copies to what we have today in the form of computers, laptops that you take with you everywhere. Heck, for that matter, your telephone.
Artificial intelligence.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's funny. Artificial intelligence. I had this friend of mine who asked me a question, and it was a little bit of off the wall question. And without going into what the question was, I'm thinking about it, and I mentioned it to another friend, and he says, Carl, try artificial intelligence. You'll get a quick answer.
Yeah.
So I type in this phrase of what the issue was. Next thing I know, I get a 3-page report. I mean, just detailing everything you can imagine.
Yeah. It's just going to continue to evolve, I think.
Yeah.
So
it's a game changer, big time. I mean, technology has been a big plus of practice of law. I mean, you and I have discussed this before. I'm sure when you first started practicing, like when I first started, libraries were the key part of a law firm.
Yes.
Librarians, we had books, supplements. Those are all gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no libraries anymore. There's no librarians at law firms. We get on our laptop or computer or whatever and type in the word, go into search, and bingo, there it is.
I do remember when the Westlaw and the searching capabilities became more common. There were a couple times where I thought, can't I just go upstairs and find it? I bet I can find what I'm looking for in the books quicker, and I'm sure I was wrong about that, but there was some comfort, I think, to kind of following a case through the books. And
I agree with you. And I must tell you, when the firm started disposing all of the library books, I decided to keep the sections relevant to the General Property Tax Act.
Yeah.
Because I would always love to turn to that.
Yes.
Because I knew exactly where to go to.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that for sure, Carl.
But yeah. So the whole thing then, again, it comes down to, experience, active participation in community, state bar, firm matters. And then it comes down to client development. Okay. You come into contact with the client, whether it's through the firm or whether through your own actions, being active in the community. And how do you develop and maintain that relationship? Well, that is so important, just so important. And we're all taught that you got to stay in touch with the client. You need to communicate with the client. You need to tell them every step you're taking on their behalf so that they know that you're, first of all, you're on top of it. Second of all, that they're being adequately represented. Uh, and that client development turns into other client development because they pass on the word to other clients.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's an art in addition to knowing your stuff.
Yes.
I think that being able to have small talk
Yes.
and learn more about the client,
Yeah.
their personal likes and dislikes, and being able to carry on a normal conversation. There are a lot of smart lawyers out
Yes.
there,
Yes.
but if your client doesn't also like you a little bit, you're going to have
Right.
trouble retaining
Yeah.
that client in the long run.
You're
So,
absolutely right.
yeah,
And the small talk does matter. I mean, you find out what their interests are, they find out what your interests are. For example, I had a client, very, very well established, large construction equipment company, and his passion was duck hunting.
Hmm.
And he invited me to go duck hunting. Now, I didn't know the first thing about duck hunting. And the last thing I wanted to do was sit in some marsh
yeah,
with a rifle aimed at some poor duck that would hopefully land. But I did it
yeah.
just to establish that relationship with the client.
Shared experiences.
Exactly. So that from there on, he would laugh about how I missed the duck. I'm not much of a shooter. I don't own a gun. But anyway, it was something we always joke about and made us closer to each other.
Yeah, that's a great example of getting to know the client
Yes.
on a deeper level.
Yes,
So,
for sure. For sure.
very
Yeah,
good.
very important. The whole thing. It
Well,
really is.
they call it a practice for a reason, because you're constantly learning, trying to get better. And Carl, in your 50 plus years, you've practiced a lot, and your advice, I think, is invaluable to, those who are just starting off, maybe in law school, or young lawyers, but also a good reminder to all of us, including those who have been practicing 20 plus years, like myself, about those things that help improve the practice, not only to help yourself as a professional, but also obviously represent the interests of your client. So thank you very much for taking the time this morning to share just a little bit of what you have learned.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And again, I always look forward to seeing you, talking with you, and to share my experiences with the firm.
Thank you,
Thank
Carl.
you. Thank you.